Alright, so I've finished loading in all of my vocal drum sounds. I've got them all set to key zones. It's all tickety-boo. I've got my snare velocity layered, so when I press the key hard, medium or soft, it plays different samples, which is what we want. Most important thing to do now is this assignment of what samples go where and which root note they play back at. Everything we've got all set up here hasn't been saved yet. So the most important thing to do now is save this instrument. So I'm going to go save as and call it vocal drum sounds. So that's saved an instrument file on an Akai sampler. It's called a program. On some samplers it's called a patch. This EMP7 calls it an instrument. So that's the assignment of what samples go where. So that's all saved now, which is what we want. So what are we up to next? That's the end of the vocal drum sounds. We need to transcribe that drum pattern from that loop. So I find the easiest way to do this, if we want to have a listen to this loop and create our own version, what I like to do is pan the loop into one ear of my headphones. So I'll pan that hard left, and then I'll pan my my samples just while I'm working on them for the time being hard right. So I've got my vocal drum sounds in one ear, and I've got the loop in the other ear, so I can hear them apart. So we've just got to listen closely to the loop. So if we had a listen to the loop, what does the snare do? And copy it. So I'll leave you guys to do that yourselves, and I'll join you again in a moment. Alright, so I've finished transcribing that drum loop 1 with my vocal drum sounds. Sounds like this. Pretty happy with that. Pretty close to the original. So that's that part of the task, transcribing the drum pattern using your vocal drum sounds. The next part of the task, I need to multi-sample some bass sounds from a synth. So we've got the Alesis Micron over in the corner of the EMP room. So you need to plug the audio outputs of the Micron into the audio inputs, an audio interface, and record it into Logic. So we need to make a new stereo audio track, and we'll set the inputs to be inputs 1 and 2 and create it. I'm going to label this synth bass. So the idea of multi-sampling, if we just sample one note from the synth and then map it across the whole keyboard on the sampler, it's going to sound a bit funny. When I play a high note, it's going to play it really fast. Bleep. When you play a no note, it's going to sound really quite strange because it's going to be pitching it too far. So the best way to take samples of a keyboard instrument or any instrument is to multi-sample it, which means you take samples of each note. So what we're going to do, have a play around with the Alesis Micron, find a sound that we like, a bass sound that we like, and once we're happy with it, record it into Logic. So hit record on Logic and record in each note from C1 to B2. So record each note. I'd play it for about 2 seconds. So I'm just going to do that now, have a play around, find a good sound and record it in. I'll be back with you in a moment. Alright, so I found a bass sound I liked. It's called Hood Bass. I've recorded it into Logic here, so I've recorded each note one at a time. So if we just solo this, have a listen. So I've multi-sampled the synth. I've got a sample for each note. So what we need to do now, we can open this in the sample editor, come down here. We need to do pretty much the same thing we did before for our vocal drums. So we need to make each note its own audio sample, its own audio file. So I'm going to highlight this first note here and go audio file, save selection as. I'm going to make a folder and I'm going to call it Alesis Micron samples. And it's really important when I name each note that I put the note name in there. So this is Hood Bass and it's C1, so it's important that I put the note name in there, C1. That's so I can remember which note I was playing, and it's also later on when we load it into the sampler, we'll get the EMP7 to automatically assign all of our key zones for us. So we've got to make sure we get our note names on each sample. So there's C1. This note here was D1. So I'm just going to go through each individual audio sample and save it as its own sample. So this was D1, etc, etc. Here's E1. Save selection as hood bass E1, etc, etc, etc. So I'll just quickly go ahead and do that and join you again in a moment. Alright, so I've just finished chopping up all of my individual Alesis Micron samples. I've got them all saved as individual WAV files in my folder. So now I'm ready to set them up on a software sampler, an EMP7. So I'm going to make a new sampler. I'll leave that one for my vocal drums. So I'll make a new software instrument track and put a new EMP7 on there, just to keep things nice and tidy. Jump in behind the scenes. So we know that what we could do is we could make a new zone. We could call this zone bass C1, and we could load in each individual audio sample. So here's my hood bass C1. There's the sample there. Load that. I could set the root key, set the key zone. That's one way we can do it for this. However, that's quite time consuming. I'll just delete that zone. What the EMP7 does allow us to do, this is because we put our file names, we labeled them all nicely, we can go to zone, we can go load multiple samples. So we can select all of these samples at once. Does that work? All of these samples at once, add them all to our list here, go done, and it's going to automatically scan each sample, detect which the root note is, how many samples there are, how much gap there is between them, and automatically assign key zones for us. I'm just going to save heaps of time. So we're done. So it asks us, do you want me to auto map the zones by reading the root key from each file in a drum zone? So when you've got drum samples, you usually don't want them pitched across the whole keyboard, so they don't usually have a range or a root key. So there's an option for that. Contiguous zones just sets up one zone after the other in the order that they are. So we're going to auto map. We're going to get it to automatically read the root key from the audio file and automatically set up zones for us. So when I go OK here, boom, it automatically takes each individual sample and it knows where it goes, how much distance there is between the notes. And you can see for the bottom one and for the top one, it's just mapped them across the whole keyboard. So here I've got my hood bass sampled in and ready to go. So that's that part of the task finished.